attachments to the slides. So we will send any slides that you don't have. We will send the complete slide deck after the committee. Candace Kirshner is our administrative professional for the office. She'll be navigating the slides. So for presenters, if you could, as you're going through the slides, just let Candace know when you want to move on to the slide. Again, if you could put yourself on mute if you don't, if you're not raising any questions, because we can hear some background noise. This meeting is meant to be interactive. So, please raise your hand in the chat feature or just unmute yourself and ask questions. Candace and Chun, I believe, I'm not an expert on this, but I believe they have some application where we'll be able to pose questions and kind of tack comments on it. It will be interactive. I don't know if Chun and Candace, if you want to mention that right now, either one of you. Is there a particular app that will have the committee members tacking on responses?
Yes, we do. We have a Lenovo board set up. I did put the link in the chat. I will also respond to all with that link so that they can provide feedback after the meeting.
Okay, so in just in the chat feature, if anybody has questions or is having any trouble with logging onto the app, please let Candace and Chun know, and they can provide some assistance. And again, if we don't get to all of your questions and comments during this meeting, as always, feel free to reach out to me. We will be keeping notes, and we will have those notes on the committee website once we get those finalized. So quick review of the agenda. So as I noted, I'm combining kind of the first two parts of this agenda. Once we go through the introductions, we'll start with a transportation update. David Bolin will be providing that. We'll go into CARES Act updates and equitable services. We'll talk a little bit about the federal allocations that have gone out and some recommendations that we would like the committee to discuss and give comments on regarding particularly Title III immigrant and Title I-D. We will briefly mention, hopefully you all have seen this in the CCIP notes, but a few weeks ago we posted for comment a plan for an ESSA amendment specific to the Title I Part C migrant. We'll talk a little bit about that. We'll talk about Title IV-A reporting process. We'll give some general federal program updates. We'll have a reflection period for that Lenovo board and other dialogue that we can discuss. Then the second part of the agenda will move into school improvement, talk about accountability and report cards. We'll have a presentation on educator effectiveness and updates, high quality instruction materials and curriculum, and we'll close out with some updates to EdSteps. So we have a pretty full agenda here, and again, I thank you for participating, and I think with that we'll do a quick once around. And again, if you could just introduce yourself, your name, where you're from, mention if you're a new member, and then maybe talk about what you want the most to get out of being a part of the committee. Jackie, not to put you on the spot, could you start?
Sure. My name's Jackie Blosser, and I'm the Title I coordinator for Lima City Schools. And I am not new to the committee as the chairperson of the committee. And what I want to get out of the meeting today is just some updates and have some questions answered, I think, as probably most of you are, with just around CARES and everything that we've adjusted to with all the COVID-related requirements for safety. So welcome all new people.
Great, thank you. So I think we'll just go right down. I know, I think we have I believe we have a quorum. We should just remind everybody, we don't follow necessarily the Robert's Rules of Order on this. This is an advisory committee team. We really don't have votes. We want to get input and feedback from the committee. But with that said, just to let everybody know that we will post the minutes that we have on in a summary of the meeting materials. I think probably the easiest way to do this, since we're not together and have a sign-in sheet, I'm looking over at the right-hand side of my screen where I can see who has logged on. It looks like we have 30 members, so we can easily see who's attending, so we can say this is a quorum. But maybe the easiest way to do this is just go alphabetically, and I'm not sure if Bob is on the call or not. If we look at the roster, is Bob here? Is Mark here? Okay, Christine?
Yes, I'm here.
Yes, you want to just give a quick introduction?
Sure. Christine Barrow from Warren City Schools, Director of State and Federal Programs here. And I'm a new member, Northeast Ohio. And I think for me, I'm looking forward to this, just connecting a lot of dots across a number of different federal programs and initiatives. And the same thing, just trying to understand and keep the pieces together through COVID and the virus.
Great, thanks, Christine. Mm-hmm. Is Paul here? Trying to look at my screen at the same time. Let's see. So, Diana, I noticed that we have a typo here. Diana, are you on the call?
Yes, Diana Ellard. Hi, my name is Diana Ellard. I'm the Deputy Chief of State and Federal Programs and Academic Resources for the Cleveland Municipal School District. And I'm here for some of the same reasons, just to learn about updates and to provide some feedback.
Great, thanks, Diana. Amy.
Hi. I'm there. I'm Amy Gallagher. I'm from Conneaut Area City Schools, which is far northeast Ohio on the lake in PA. I'm an intervention specialist, and I just want to learn new information and find out how I can help my district understand some of these things.
Great. Welcome, Amy. Lisa, and welcome aboard. Lisa, I saw you were on here. And you may be muted. Lisa, you may, I think I see you're muted. You may want to click the unmute button. Okay, we'll come back to Lisa. Jonah. All right.
There we go. There we go. I'm unmuted. It's actually Jonna.
Oh, Jonna. Sorry.
Yeah, that's okay. It takes a while for some people to learn because of the spelling, but it is Jonna. I'm Director of Curriculum for Marietta City Schools, and I am a newbie to this group, so I appreciate being involved. And part of the reason that I wanted to be with this group is just to assure that Southeast Ohio is represented. Just listening to where many of you come from, you know, north or a larger city area. And down in Southeast Ohio, we have a lot of issues that differ greatly from the large city school districts. And so we just want to have a voice and be represented and make sure that we understand a lot of the stuff that comes and goes through Ohio Department of Education. So thanks for having me.
Great, thanks, Jonna. And like if those that you have the roster in front of you, in the blue highlights, those are the members that have that are either new or have were term limited out and reapplied and are now on the committee. So Robert, are you available? Alexandria, are you here?
Hi there, I'm here. My name is Alexandra Pavlik, and I'm actually a new member as well. I am a school psychologist for Northridge Local School District, which is a district that serves a more rural area. We're kind of located northeast of Central Ohio. I am here just to really gain a better understanding of federal programs and initiatives and to hopefully support my district in implementing those things.
Great. Well, welcome aboard. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Jennifer, are you on?
I'm here.
Hi, Jennifer.
I'm Jenny Petticord. I'm from Westlake City Schools, and I'm the ESL teacher here at the high school. And I'm here not as a newbie, but I'm here to understand how the initiatives affect my ESL students and how to keep them connected in best way.
Great, thanks, Jenny. Maria. Is Maria here? Okay. How about Rachel?
Rachel Seifert, is that? I don't
Yes.
have my list in front of me.
Yeah.
Hi, I'm Rachel Seifert. I am the elementary curriculum coordinator and coordinator for federal funding in the Cuyahoga Falls City School District. That's just north of Akron Schools. I am new to the committee, so I'm very excited to be a part. I think the biggest takeaway that I want is just to be able to be a part of listening to the collaborative ideas of everybody on the committee. I think when we get that opportunity to share across these big venues, I think it opens up our minds to things that we didn't either know were happening or know were possibilities for us to use and implement in our own area. So I'm excited about that, and I'm excited to take some ideas back to my district as well as just to my local area.
Great, thanks, Rachel. Derek, are you on? Not sure if I see Derek. Lynn, are you on here? Okay, and how about Loretta? Is Loretta on? Okay, well, for those of you that were either muted or having some, we're having some technical difficulties, please, feel free to chime in and introduce yourself if we did not get to you. So with that, we're a few minutes. I see 9:17. We wanted to do the welcoming before, try to get that all by 9:15. With that, we'll just move right into the agenda. And our first presenter is David Bolin. David will talk about transportation issues, and he's the director of field relations and the lead on transportation. David?
All right. Thank you, Jeremy. I hope everyone can hear me okay. I thought it would be a little bit easier just to list, instead of just listing a variety of updates, just to kind of talk through, because as Jeremy mentioned at the very beginning, this is just been a real unprecedented time, especially in transportation. And what I recall is, as COVID hit in March, and a lot of schools started scrambling to figure out not what only they were going to do at the end of that particular year, but this upcoming school year. It wasn't until probably June or early July that we really started focusing and hearing questions that came up about transportation, thinking that, in order to really have a strong start to a school year, we need to make sure that we can get kids to and from school in a safe manner. So I want to just give you a couple updates. One is really coming out of ODE, and then several from the field that will, hopefully kind of frame some thoughts as we move forward. Let me tell you that in sometime late last year, we had an audit, a transportation audit at ODE, and it looked back at the last 5 years, and specifically around the reporting mechanism, and even more specific around the T1 and the T2 reports that schools send in. And one of the things that was very evident was that there was an issue related to accuracy on the numbers that were coming in, and there was an issue around timeliness when the reports were coming in as well. So as many of you know, the T1 report is due October 15th, and the T2 report is due August 31st. So we've already sent out a lot of reminders about the T2 report. We really want to stress two things this year: making sure that we can get them in on time in August 31st, and that they are as accurate as possible. One of the things that's been added as an update to the T2 report is an internal audit this year, and we felt that this would allow districts to really kind of review the numbers that they put in these reports prior to submitting them. It gives them another kind of look at what they're submitting, because it's all obviously tied to funding. Also, the other thing that's very important regarding the T1 report is that, in the past, and was kind of seen in the audit, the T1 report by code is due October 15th, but a lot of schools were submitting them by November 1st in the previous years. The audit exposed that we need to make sure that we stick by the October 15th date, which doesn't give schools a lot of time to do that count week, but we'll certainly work with everyone to try to make sure that that's done in an efficient manner. So those two are probably the biggest updates as we move forward into this upcoming school year with regards to coming out of ODE. From the field, one of the things that we've done is we've had a lot of conversation with schools and school districts around the state, and we've had an opportunity to really go over their obligation as it relates to transportation. And one of the things that has been really emphasized is this concept of communication, and we've really been emphasizing two tenets moving forward. Number one is again, just a general kind of understanding that with respect to communication, we highly recommend and truly emphasize that school districts and schools really come together at the same table as schools put together their transportation plan. And when I talk about schools, I'm speaking of schools like community schools, non-public schools, really having a seat at the table when school districts are talking about transportation plans. There's a lot of arbitrary decisions that are being made across the state, and we want to make sure that the school district that does have the obligation to transport students understand all the information that's coming out of those community and non-public schools in order to put together the most efficient plan, the most accurate plan, and most importantly, the most safe plan to get all Ohio's children to school and from school, not just focused on the public school students. The other tenet is reasonableness. We've had a lot of conversations with school districts around, the concept of reasonableness. We've had a lot of questions that came up around the use of public transportation, especially in the large urban areas where public transportation for years is one that is a legal mode of transportation and has been used especially at the higher grade level. But during the COVID-19 situation and as we move into this upcoming year, that's certainly been on the forefront of school districts utilizing public transportation, especially for the younger grades. So we emphasize the need for a kind of a reasonable approach, a reasonableness approach when thinking about a transportation plan for young students, specifically K through 8. We feel that would be in the best interest of kids and families when schools are making decisions around this. And I think one of the biggest questions that had come up, if I were to pinpoint one specific question that has been a consistent piece around the state, as school districts try to figure out what's happening, are we moving into a remote learning environment? Are we doing face-to-face? Are we doing some type of hybrid? Is what is my obligation to transport if I go remote, if I go in a hybrid situation? And the answer is relatively easy. School is in session, and the districts still have an obligation to transport as per the code. And we know that right now specifies specifically K to 8, but if you have already started after July 1 in the transportation of students 9 through 12, then other pieces of the code kind of jump in and say that you need to continue that transportation throughout the rest of the year. So we've been really trying to emphasize, again, no matter what your plan is, no matter how you're going to educate students, please make sure that you communicate that with all of the schools that you're responsible to transport to, so that everybody has a seat at that table, and so that everyone has the ability to understand what those plans are. So in conclusion, I think one of the biggest pieces that we've put out there, not only from our offices in transportation, but certainly the offices of the state superintendent and the deputy superintendent and the Office of Field Relations and Dr. Scott Hunt, has been this level of communication and making sure that all schools understand what the plan is, have the ability to speak through that plan, and so that we're providing a really high level of transportation in a safe and effective manner. So we move forward with this. School is beginning. We always have someone that are manning our phones to answer questions, to be able to help school districts kind of understand this kind of new reality right now, at least for the time being, with transportation. So, please feel free to contact me. We have 2 transportation professionals, Jason Hellman and Emmanuel Brooks, in our transportation department at ODE, that are very skilled in understanding general transportation questions, as well as very specific issues related to your situation or certainty. So please, we thank you for all that you do, and this is a very challenging time. And I wanted to make sure that we at least got through some of those updates with respect to transportation. So Jeremy, with that, I'll turn it back over to you.
David, thank you so much. Would you mind putting your contact information into the chat feature, so if they have questions and comments, they can send it to the right individual around transportation?
Yes, I will do that. Okay. For sure. And
before we move on to the next part, we have a few minutes here. Are there any questions from the committee right now for David in the next couple minutes? I guess the easiest way would just either be raise your hand or just unmute your phone. Any questions for David? Okay, hearing none. David, thanks so much. And if you would be so kind to put your contact information in there so everybody sees it. Thanks again, David.
Thank you.
All right. So Candace, if you could move on to the next slide. So, and I apologize to everybody. I was working on some slides here this morning. So Candace will likely be sending you here in the next few moments a slide deck that you would have that has additional information that I'm going to talk about on the CARES Act. But in the meantime, I'll just go over some of my slides that I have, and then we'll turn it over to Chantel, but you will have the slides that I'm going to speak from here. So the CARES Act is obviously a very, it is a, keeping us on our toes here at the Department of Education, I'm sure with everybody at the local level as well. The CARES Act was enacted back on March 27th of 2020. It contains over $2 trillion in emergency funding, including over $30 billion for education. For K-12 education, there are really two main programs, but I'll talk a little bit, as we go on about some additional CARES funds that are not, per se, coming through the state education agency, but we are helping to administer. But as far as the CARES Act K-12 education programs, there are two main programs. One is at the national level, there was $3 billion for the Governor's Emergency Education Relief Fund. And Ohio received a little over $100 million, $105 million for the governor's, the acronym is GEAR. The GEAR has not, to my knowledge, been awarded yet in terms of the funds that would go to the local districts. But the GEARS funds is intended to provide emergency support to the local education agencies as well as the higher education for essential education services that were impacted by COVID-19. To my knowledge, that is being administered by the governor's office, and I don't believe those funds have been awarded to the local districts yet. I'm assuming will be working with the governor's office to help support the GEARS program and the administration, and we will be providing information as they come. But the main program that the Department of Education is working on is the Elementary and Secondary Schools Emergency Relief Fund, which is better known as ESSER. There was $13.2 billion that was administered for that program nationally. Ohio received almost 489 million for the ESSER funds. Before I get into the particulars of the ESSER, I do want to also mention a couple other components about the CARES Act before we actually received the ESSER award. The CARES Act also provided the U.S. Department released opportunities to have state education agencies apply for waivers, fiscal waivers. And the Ohio Department of Education applied and received approval of those waivers on April 21st, I believe. The waivers waived certain fiscal statutory requirements for federal fiscal year 19 funds. In particular, there were four waivers that we received for the federal fiscal year 19 awards. One was for Title I carryover limitation. As many of you know, there's a limitation of 15% carryover of Title I. And for fiscal year 2019 Title I, that waiver allowed that we do not have that limitation for those funds for fiscal year 19. It also, for the period of availability of fiscal year 18 ESSA funds, and I know this gets somewhat complicated because of the different years, but each education fund for each year has 27 months of a period of availability. So the period for fiscal year 18, the period of availability would have expired on September 30th of 2020. So just in a month or so. So this waiver allowed us to extend that period of availability for fiscal year 18 funds to September 30th of 2021. So we received another year for the period of availability. And that is for many different types of ESEA related grants, including Title I, Title II, Title III, Title IV, down the level. We also received a flexibility around Title IV-A, and we don't need to necessarily get into all the particulars of this, but Title IV-A is a very broad, and I believe Morgan's going to be speaking more on this later on in the presentation. But Title IV provides flexibility in the way that you can use funds. In particular, there are three broad categories. This waiver allowed us for districts that are receiving more than $30,000 in Title IV not to have the particular limitations on the three buckets of money. There were particular limitations on the amount of money and the percentage of money that would need to be applied to the three buckets if a district received more than $30,000 in Title III, Title IV-A. And so this waiver basically removed that requirement to meet those limitations or those specific percentages for each of those buckets of funds. And the last waiver was the definition of professional development, and basically the waiver allows the district to conduct time-sensitive and one-time professional development focused on effective distance learning. So within the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, there is a particular definition of professional development. So thank you for allowing me to talk about those waivers. But that was an important first step before we actually got the ESSER fund. So as I noted, the ESSER fund provided about $490 million to the Department of Education here in Ohio. 440 million, 90% of the award goes out to local education agencies through the Title I formula. The districts may use those funds on very broad uses. In fact, within the application, there are 12 very broad uses of funds. And again, it's intended to support the districts in addressing the impact of COVID. So the remaining amount is used for as a state reserve that we're working currently to determine how we're going to apply those state activities that would also be used to support the districts. Another slide that I will provide in the updated slide deck is really our implementation of the ESSER fund. We took a hands-on approach. Our goal was to make sure that we got these funds out to the districts and to the non-public schools in a timely manner. This is for an emergency. I think we're in a much better position than many states that have not even begun to spend the funds. We created an application, the funds are flowing, and we are trying to provide clarity and guidance to districts on a regular basis through the CCIP notes, hopefully that you're getting. One of the particular areas, and we are providing trainings and supports around these particular issues, is equitable services. That has been a sticky issue, to say the least, across the nation. In fact, over this weekend, there was a court case and verdict that came down on the U.S. Department's interim rule. I'm not going to get into the particulars of that. We will wait to hear what the U.S. Department of Ed instructs us on. But in the particular issue on equitable services, and I'm going to turn this over now to Chantel Carter, is that there are differing approaches that some believe with equitable services. And so, Chantel, are you on the line?
I am.
Okay. So, Candace, I think we can move on to the slide, and Chantel and I will be here to answer any of your questions on the CARES in general and also on equitable services. Thank you, Chantel.
Thanks, Jeremy. And thank all of the committee of practitioner members that are participating in this call today. It is really helpful when we can build networks within the state of people who have guidance and have answers to their questions, because we know that you have your own networks and you have connections that you share this information with. So it is helpful that you are participating in this process. So the slide you see shows a screenshot from the document library, and all of the CCIP notes that we have from our office do go by email to certain user groups. For ESSER, all of the CCIP notes that we have sent out have gone to both the public audience as well as the non-public audience, because this topic of equitable services does impact them. And all of our CCIP notes are archived in the CCIP document library. So this is showing you that CCIP note 442 can be found within the CCIP note archive. And this is the CCIP note that provides districts Ohio's guidance in reference to the interim final rule. This CCIP note did come out on July 10th. And we've had a couple of clarifications that came out after this in regards to expenditures. CCIP note 444 was about expenditures, but in the actual calculation, CCIP note 442 is the one that you should be referencing as you work with your non-public schools to calculate the amount of equitable services under ESSER. Candace, you can go ahead and move to the next slide. The next slide is a screen capture of that CCIP note that I was talking about, and there is a hyperlinked link to the USED website where you can go and read the full 57-page interim final rule if you would like. The period for comments have closed since the CCIP note came out. And again, the interim final rule is the rule that we have provided our guidance on. As Jeremy referenced, there are other things at play at the national level, but Ohio is moving forward with the guidance in CCIP note 442. Okay, Candace. So again, as Jeremy mentioned, we have been proactive as a state in providing the opportunity for districts to apply for their ESSER funds without any delays. We provided a calculation Excel file that was a tool for districts to use in the calculation using either low income amounts, which was approach 1, or the total enrollment approach, which was approach 2. That calculation spreadsheet was developed as a tool prior to the interim final rule being released. So we did set districts up for some work on the front side, but it should have made it easier once the interim final rule was released. Initial ESSER applications we did approve so long as districts calculated using both approaches and then budgeted the higher approach of the two. We did caution districts to only spend the lower amounts in district non-public schools until some determination was made, which we know happened in 442. Go ahead, Candace. The importance of consultation is really, really important in all federal programs, in your normal consolidated application, and especially in CARES Act ESSER funds. What we found in the very beginning of the process is we weren't sure if we were going to be using low income or total enrollment. And we knew that there may be gaps in the data that we had, as all non-public schools don't choose to report low income data. So we encouraged districts from the beginning to consult with all of the non-public schools that they have a relationship with, both in the district and out of the district. We encouraged districts to eliminate or determine if non-public schools were for-profit schools. We do know that for-profit schools are not eligible for ESSER funds. And then we also encourage districts to reach out to any non-chartered, non-tax schools. Those schools are eligible for equitable services under ESSER, but they're not always in NPDES. So districts really had the responsibility early in the summer to gather all of that data, to consult with all of those schools, so that once the decision came out in 442, you had all of the data that you needed to make those actual calculations. Okay, Candace. So 442, CCIP note 442 still shows two different approaches. There is a low income approach and there is the total enrollment approach. The low income approach, though, is not in exact alignment with the file that we provided in early May or late May. So there needs to be some manipulation of that data if the district chooses to go low income. But ultimately, when we're providing guidance for how a district should calculate equitable services under ESSER, it goes back to how the district is planning to use those funds. So when we take calls, that's the first question. How is the district choosing to plan to use their ESSER funds? And it's really easy in instances where a district doesn't serve all of their buildings with Title I. And we'll get to that in a minute, but that's kind of the starting question, because that will help us determine very quickly which approach should be used. Go ahead, Candace, with the next slide. So if ESSER services are only going to be provided in public buildings that are served with Title I, then the district may use the low income count approach to determine equitable services. Now, CCIP note 442 does outline two different low income approaches. Candace, I think that's on the next slide. So the first low income approach, which in CCIP note 442 is listed as little I, a district can choose to use the low income counts that were used to calculate the amount under Title I for last fiscal year. So you would go back to the FY20 application. You would look at the low income counts that were reported for Title I last year, and you would be providing equitable services at all non-public schools that participated in Title I, both in and out of the district. Out of the three approaches that can be used, this little letter I is one that I have not seen any district use, and that is because this is the only one that would require equitable services to go beyond the boundary of the district. The schools or the districts that are using the low income approach are using double little I or II. And that one is calculating a new amount based on the number of low income children in non-public schools. This is our most recent data, data that was reported in the springtime and in PDS based on October count week. This is also the place where you would be adding non-chartered, non-tax data for schools that you recently consulted with, or adding low income counts to schools that didn't report data in NPDS for Title I purposes. So you would take that newly identified low income information and base a calculation on that with a proportion of the low income children in non-public schools over the low income children in Title I served schools within the district. So again, this is not in an exact alignment with the file that we provided in late May. So if your district is choosing the low income approach, I would encourage you to reach out to myself or the consultant that's assigned to your district, and we will help you manipulate that file so that you're getting an accurate calculation under ESSER. Go ahead, Candace, please. So I thought there was another slide in here. If the district is providing services at buildings that are not served with Title I, then you must use approach 2, which is the approach that's based on total enrollment. That is in alignment with the Excel file that we provided, approach 2. So that one is the easier one using the spreadsheet. It doesn't require any additional manipulation. This slide talks about supplement, not supplant. And while we know that this does not apply to ESSER funds, it does, supplement, not supplant, does apply to Title I funds. So a district must be careful and thoughtful about the ways that they're using ESSER funds in instances where you do not serve all of your Title I schools, because the amount of funds, state and local funds that are each school is entitled to cannot be reduced because of the ESSER funds. It's a little bit not a straightforward explanation, but we know that it does apply in Title I buildings and to Title I funds. Okay, Candace. So everything we've talked about so far is how to calculate the amount, right? So if we use the low income approach, we're going to use the number of low income children in non-public schools. If we use the total enrollment approach, we're going to use all of the counts of children regardless of where they come from. But once we have the amount calculated, those services are intended to be for any children and teachers in the non-public school. Even if you choose the low income approach, all of the students in the non-public school can benefit from CARES Act expenditures and activities. So it's not a Title I program, and it shouldn't be delivered in that manner. It would be for all, everyone in the school. Okay, Candace. Here's the slide I was looking for before. So if the district chooses to use ESSER funds more broadly and provide services in buildings that are not served with Title I, then approach 2 must be used. Again, approach 2 is in alignment with the spreadsheet that we provided you. So it should be easy to determine if you have budgeted the correct amount for approach 2, if that's the one that you're using. Those are all of my slides. So if anyone has questions, feel free to type them in the chat box or raise your hand.
Chantel, thank you so much. So a few things. We have a few minutes here for questions. I know this is can be a complicated issue, so please feel free to unmute your phone, type any questions, or let us let myself or Chantel know if you have any questions. In the meantime, I've been informed that it may be because of the bandwidth issues, it may be best to put to turn off your cameras unless you're speaking. So if you do have your camera on, unless you're going to speak, you probably should turn that off. But when you unmute yourself, please put your video on. But in the meantime, if you have any questions, please let us know. We're also going to put up the Linote board. We are definitely going to have that during where people can start adding sticky notes to the board. You can do that at any time, but we're going to focus on that during the break period. But feel free to add sticky notes to that board at this time as well. So any questions for myself or Chantel?
Hi, it's Diana Allard. I had one quick question.
Hi, Diana.
Hi. Chantel, if you could just clarify, if we select the economically disadvantaged calculation and we're 100% school-wide, are we saying that when we use ESSER funds, a supplement supplant does not apply? Is that correct? I just need a clarification on that one.
So every single one of your buildings, Diana, is Title I served?
Correct. Even the high schools.
Jeremy, do you want to make a comment about supplement, not supplant? I mean, we know it applies to Title I, but it doesn't apply to ESSER.
Yeah, so I think that the first thing to think about is, as Chantel mentioned, supplement, not supplant, does not apply to the ESSER program. But what this reminder is that other federal funds have supplement, not supplant requirements. So Diana, in your case where you are serving, and I know Jim Como is also on the call, and Jim, feel free to chime in here too, since you're the consultant for Cleveland. But if you are serving all of your buildings, and all of your buildings are Title I. Your question is basically, does supplement, not supplant? I think your question is, does that apply? Now, ESSER doesn't have a supplanting requirement, but you just need to be very careful that if you're that you do not want to to have any of your funds that would have been used to support the students and teachers in those Title I buildings, because those are Title I are supplemental funds, and then exchange those with state and local funds. And I know I'm not answering your question probably to where what you want, but I think it's important that we probably talk offline on that because you're asking a question about school-wide. Jim, do you want to add anything to this, or Chantel?
The only thing I would add is that whether or not you choose a low-income approach or an enrollment approach does not impact whether supplement, not supplant applies for Title I or II or whatever. Those supplement, not supplant apply without regard to how you select that. The interim final rule contains a reference to supplement, not supplant, and as near as we can tell, it is not in reference to the ESSER funds. It is in reference to Title I, or presumably other titles that are governed by supplement, not supplant. So I would encourage you not to, lose a lot of sleep over the supplement, not supplant issue. But as Jeremy suggested and Chantel suggested, if you do have questions, we can help you work through them.
Thanks, Jim.
Thank you.
Other questions? We have a few more minutes before we're actually a good transition, turning it over to Jim and his team. But any questions that others have about CARES Act in general? I should say at the beginning of my presentation, I talked about, mostly focusing on the ESSER funds, but you are probably seeing CCIP notes, and you're probably, your districts are probably seeing opportunities for other CARES Act related funds. I have to admit that, our office here in Office of Federal Programs really is focused on the ESSER grant, but as I mentioned, the GEARS funds will also be coming soon. We also know that there's a Corona relief fund that has been rolled out. Now, I'm not an expert on that. If you do have questions, that program is actually, I believe, coming from the Social Security, portion of the CARES Act, and it is going to state and local governments, but part of that goes to, and it's from the U.S. Treasury, but that those funds have, we've been asked in the state education agency to provide some of those funds to K-12 education, and our Office of Finance is actually administering that program, and information I believe has gone out on how those dollars will be provided to school districts, and I believe it's going through the CCIP. Jim or Diane, if they're on the call, they may be able to chime in on that. But I just wanted to make sure that it can be challenging to understand all the various funding pots of the CARES Act, and likely we are going to receive, there's discussions going on right now with Congress, as you probably know, about a second wave of CARES related support. So I'm not going to get into the particulars. We don't know about that, but the money that we're talking about right now is just from the awards that we have received under the first CARES. And like I said, we got $490 million, and that was around 13 billion nationally for education. There was talk about the next CARES Act being over 100 billion. So if you just look at that from a proportionate standpoint, I'd imagine there's going to be a significant amount more emergency relief funds that are becoming. So the first CARES Act has various pots of money. ESSER is the main program that we and on our offices has been administering. Jim, Diane, anything you want to add? Okay. Well, with that, I'm going to turn it over to now Jim and his team to talk about allocations and ways that we're looking to get feedback from you on how we can be more effective and efficient with the resources that we provide and that we receive from the federal government. So we do not. None of us want to none of us want to see any funds returned to the U.S. Treasury. So we want to be more effective and efficient. And Jim, I'm going to turn it over to you and your team. Thank you.
Thank you, Jerry. So really our allocation process for this year has remained consistent from year to year. There are no new updates, changes to either how the Fed send money to us or how we send money to you. When I say that, I mean, I'm talking here about our basic programs, so 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. And for those of you who received Rural 5, there have been no major changes except for Rural. We did expand it a little by Diane Neal did some excellent work expanding the number of LEAs that are eligible to receive funds under the Rural grant, which is great. But for the most part, ours are pretty stable. As with many of you, we're a lot busier. We're doing our regular jobs, and then we're also responding to a bunch of questions regarding the coronavirus and its impacts. Most obvious is how we've had to roll out ESSER, but also we're getting new and interesting questions about how money can be spent in our other grants. So we are busier. We might not have applications approved as you might be used to. The only thing I'd say with that, if you need an ESSER grant approved or a consolidated app approved, gently nudge your consultant, and he or she will then gently nudge us to get them into the right status so that you can submit PCRs. It's always our goal, as Jeremy suggested, to disperse these funds to you in as effective and efficient manner as we can. A secondary goal for us is to make sure all the money that's headed to Ohio stays in Ohio, that we spend this money. And the thing we need to talk to you about now, Rasha is going to talk to you a little bit about some changes we can make to Title III immigrant to make that program more robust, more consistent. And then Karen Auble will be speaking with you about some changes we think might be beneficial to make sure that we get this fund spent in Ohio under the Title I-D program, specifically on the neglected side. So Rasha, if you'd like to start here talking about the potential changes to Title III immigrant.
Sure. Thanks, Jim.
Thank you. Hey, thank you.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you for being here. The main reason, like Jim said, is that we're looking at the Title III immigrant allocations and how we distribute those funds to the districts, is because those funds are being underspent currently. When we look at the final expenditure reports and how fast they're being drawn down, we've noticed that a lot of districts are not drawing down their Title III immigrant. Those funds are supplemental. They only go out to, for FY21, they only went out to 40 school districts in Ohio. Allocations ranged between, the highest was 122,000 down to 1,600. So as you can see, there is a big variety. Some school districts are getting a lot of them. Others are not getting enough to be able to implement a supplemental efficient program to help those immigrant funds. Candace, can you flip to the next slide, please? Next.
Rasha, I'm sorry. That was the presentation I had for that portion.
Okay. Can you allow me to share my screen?
Oh, absolutely.
I have them in. Okay.
One moment here.
Sure.
Rasha, I see that you posted slides in. If those could see in the chat, it looks like Rasha posted slides in there. And now keep in mind, we'll make sure that all these additional slides are added to the final slide deck and send it to you afterwards as well. But if those can't see Rasha's screen, she posted it on the in the chat feature. Thanks, Rasha.
Okay, so just to give you a quick idea, for the immigrant funds, to be eligible for the immigrant students, they are usually students that are in between ages 3 to 21. They were not born in any state, and they has not been attending any or more schools in the last 3 full years.
Rasha, I'm not seeing your screen.
Trying to.
I was opening up them up to see if I had them as well.
So Candace, you're going to open up the presentation?
I am opening it now, yes. Thank you.
Thank you.
Just a moment.
Here, I'll send you or resend it again, only my section. Candace, so it's easier for you to open it. What I sent was just the full presentation that you've sent earlier because audience were asking for it, but I'll send you my specific immigrant sections right now.
Well, just in the meantime, Rasha, while we're getting this pulled up, do you want to just maybe go through and highlight what you're seeing on your own personal screen so we can get, make sure we're on schedule here. If you want to go over some of your comments that you want to make.
Sure, absolutely. I'm trying to open it. So basically what we're trying to look at is hoping to get some feedback on what the districts or what the committee thinks about re-looking at the way we do the allocations for the immigrant. The only reason we wanted to do that is because we, like I said, we have 40 school districts that do receive those allocations, but it varies from $122,000 up to $1,600. Those funds have to be supplemental. And the way we look at them now is we look at, there has to be at least 30 immigrant students reported in each school district and a 15% increase over the last 2 years average. This is a formula that we have flexibility in. The USUE does give us, the state's flexibility in being able to give a smaller amount of districts a bigger amounts of dollars, so that way they have enough space to be able to implement supplemental immigrant programs for their immigrant students.
Rasha, thank you so much. Again, everybody, we will make sure that the information that Rasha shared is in your slide deck. Rasha, just a couple questions maybe to get everybody,
Sure.
thinking through this. So the immigrant portion that we are required by law to allocate, is there a specific amount that or percentage of the Title III funds that we have to set aside for immigrant?
Right now, out of the whole Title III, the majority does go for the English learners, and then we have up to 5% that we receive, we keep for the immigrant allocations, just because the difference in the numbers for the immigrant students, which right now for FY21, we only had almost 10,000 students in Ohio, versus a much bigger number for Title III EL. So that's why for the immigrants, we only set aside 5% that we distribute for the school districts.
Great. And maybe this is for the committee, as you're posting ideas and thoughts on the Linote board sticky, it would be helpful if you let us know your thoughts on this, because what we want to make sure we do is, of this 5% that's being set aside, and Rasha, correct me if I'm saying anything inaccurate, we have seen historically some underspending in that area. And what we want to make sure that we do is we don't return those funds to the U.S. Treasury that we're serving, the students and the teachers of Ohio with those funds. Now, Rasha or Jim, correct me if I'm wrong, if in the event that these funds are not, if we are allocating those funds and they are not being spent, we can sweep those funds and maybe repurpose those back into the Title III, a larger pot of funds. Is that correct?
We typically don't do that. We haven't gone to that scenario yet, but we do have the option to do that, yes. And we have the option to reduce the amount that we're setting aside for the immigrant funds total.
Okay, so I guess we would ask for the committee some thoughts on that. One option that we have is to reduce. It sounds like, Rasha, the amount that we set aside for immigrant. Another option would be it can out of the districts that we provide these funds to, do we want to lower or increase the amount, or reduce the amount of actual grantees that receive these, and do we want to ensure that those funds that are not spent on immigrant get repurposed back into the larger pool of the Title III, which it doesn't sound like that's currently being happening. Is that correct, Rasha?
Yeah, and the other option as well, right now, the way we give out the formula to school districts is the district has to have at least 30 immigrant students. So we can always relook at that numbers and make it 50 immigrant students or a much larger number. So that way we get a bigger amount of funds to a lesser amount of school districts. Okay. And I was able to just send my slides specifically.
Great. Okay, well, thank you so much, Rasha. Jim and Karen, do you want to move on to the Title I-D?
Sure, I can do that. Hi, everybody. I'm Karen Auble. I am the Title I-D coordinator, and I've worked with a lot of your districts on that. What we are seeing with Title I-D, subpart 2, is in some ways similar to the situation that Rasha just described with immigrant, is that we have a lot of flexibility in ESSA as far as how we allocate funds in Title I-D, but we have kept to a pretty strict formula to this point, limiting Title I-D funds to those LEAs that have neglected or delinquent facilities within their district boundaries. The situation for these students is changing, and you have a lot more community-based programs and a great need for transition programs after the students leave the facility that may not be captured in how we're doing our allocations currently. So what we are looking to do is begin to explore the flexibility that the state can include youth participating in locally operated community day school programs and schools that have a lot of children and youth who are neglected or delinquent who do not live in the facility. So looking at taking advantage of that flexibility of counting students for the formula to allocate funds versus actually serving them. And so the benefit for this is just to be able to serve students much more effectively, to spend down funds so that we don't have that issue of unspent funds anymore, and being able to serve districts who are maybe not served by Title I-D currently. So we're looking to establish some additional eligibility criteria over the next year, and we welcome your feedback in that process.
Thanks, Karen. Do you have some, and if you don't have the particulars right now, that's fine, that we can send to the committee in terms of maybe some of the details that you just mentioned?
Absolutely.
Again, I think during the period right now and during our break, if anybody has any thoughts about some of the ideas that Karen just mentioned in terms of expanding the eligibility or anything like that that would help us maximize these dollars going out, and and ensuring that all the students and teachers in systems are supported with these funds. So if you could maybe add some of those details, maybe even put it on the actual board, and then that would be great. Any questions for that the committee would have right now for Karen and Rasha before we move on to the next portion?
I do have a comment or maybe a question for Rasha.
Sure.
You mentioned that you only have 40 districts that are receiving the migrant funds, and I'm not very clear on whether my district is one of them, because I know at least prior to 1920, we didn't have the exact documentation that we needed to get those funds. I was wondering if it would be possible to maybe push out to the ESCs some more detailed information about how you qualify for those. Just speaking from my own experience, I think that people are not applying for funds that they might be eligible for.
Yeah, thank you so much. And Rasha, please feel free to comment. One of the things we are also, and I would say both for Rasha and Karen's area, where we can leverage the ESCs. I'd be very interested to know what the committee would think in terms of, some regional approaches for using these funds as well. But thank you so much for the question. And Rasha, do you want to chime in on that?
Yeah, sure. I was about to reply back. I just put in my email if anybody has any questions or any comments as well for me, but I've also added a post-it on the LANET that Candice shared earlier. But to answer your question, so the Title III immigrant funds, if the district, it's different than the Title III English learners. The immigrant funds, if the district is eligible for those funds, they get loaded immediately into the CCIP. That's different than the Title III for English learners because you have to have at least a minimum of $10,000 in order to get those funds loaded into CCIP and being able to use them independently. For the Title III English learners, we do have a list for those districts that are eligible for less than 10,000 and must join a consortium to be eligible to receive them, and that's posted on the website. However, the immigrants, there's no threshold or requirement for $10,000, and once we have the formula and we have the allocations amounts, it gets loaded into the CCIP. So that's something else as well. Does not help the districts in sustainability for the immigrant program that they develop because the numbers do fluctuate and you could be eligible to receive those funds 1 year, but then the following year you may not get the 5% required increase for the last average of the 2 years. So that's why you may get it 1 year and then the next year you don't get it. But again, it gets loaded in the CCIP. So if you're eligible and you receive it, it will be there and you'll be able to see it in the CCIP.
Okay, thank you, Rasha. Just for purposes of you making sure we're on the time, if again, please feel free to reach out to Rasha and Karen and Jim and myself if you have any other questions about and thoughts, just in general on how we can be more effective as a state and efficient with spending our federal resources. So thank you, Karen, Rasha, and Jim. The next item on the agenda is around the Title I-C migrant education amendment that we're seeking for to our ESSA plan. I'm not going to go over too much of this. Hopefully, those of you that see our CCIP notes, I can't remember which note it was that we put this out, but we put this out in the CCIP note in other communication venues seeking public comment on this amendment. It's very, very technical in nature. And Rasha can add to this if she would like, but essentially, we, in our process of updating our state migrant plan, we made, some adjustments to our measurable program objectives. And that was part of a requirement that the U.S. Department asked us to do that. And so during the process of working on our state migrant plan, we and our stakeholders made those adjustments to our measurable program objectives. And because the ESSA plan at the time that we submitted that did not have that level of specificity, we have to now add that. And that's the technical nature of this, is adding those measurable program objectives that were already approved and provided to us through stakeholder involvement into the actual ESSA plan. So I know it sounds very, very technical, but that's all this is. And we wanted to make sure that we gave the opportunity for anybody to provide comment on that process. So Rasha, anything you want to add on that?
I just sent the link for the Title I-C migrant with the ESSA amendment as well posted if anybody would like to go in and look at more. But I think you've summarized it very well. The only thing I would add is that because we are a state that do receive Title I-C migrant funds, so as a requirement from the feds, we do have to provide look at the needs assessment, provide a state delivery plan to lay out our measurable program outcomes and what kind of delivery services delivery we're providing. And then we also have to evaluate our migrant program that we provide with those funds. And that's actually a requirement that had to be done on a 2 to 3 year base cycle. So we had to do those revisions, and we are submitting them we've submitted them, posted them for public comments. And we will be submitting that revision request to the feds as soon as we get policy and superintendent approval on it.
Great, thank you so much, Rasha. Any questions on this? And just to remind everybody, this is a very technical in nature in terms of our modification to our ESSA plan is simply to now, instead of having not prescribing the program measurable program objectives, we are describing those in our ESSA plan that through the measures that Rasha just noted. Any questions on that? Okay. Now we are going to move into Title IV. And next up will be Morgan Brown, who's the Title IV coordinator. Morgan?
Hi, everybody. Thank you, Jeremy, and thanks to everybody for being here today and giving us feedback. And look forward to presenting on our Title IV-A reporting process today. So, Candace, if you can go to the next one. So, basically, we have to improve our reporting process due to some U.S. Department clarification on how to report expenditures with Title IV. If you remember, Title IV is a much more recent grant than Title I or Title II. Came out 4 years ago, and we're just kind of getting into the reporting side from the U.S. Department. They're just now kind of clarifying how we're supposed to report various elements of the grant. So today we're going to look at Title IV in general, just a really quick high-level overview, and then we'll talk about our current reporting process and what have been some of the challenges as we get those U.S. Department guidelines, and then solutions, potential solutions, and I would love to get feedback from the committee on potential solutions, and then how we're going to enhance our system to meet the requirements of the U.S. Department. And then how we're engaging with schools and districts and what the next steps will be. Candace, if you could.
Morgan, real quickly, if I could, and I'm sorry to interrupt. Hey, everybody, I think we're having some bandwidth issues, and I noticed this before, but it's been asked to ask again. If you are not speaking, if you could just, take yourself off video. So thank you so much. Sorry, Morgan.
That's okay. Can everybody hear me okay, though, or is it my video skipping and all that?
We can hear you, Morgan.
Okay, great. Awesome. So these are the FY19 numbers, but Title IV at this point is the appropriation is about $40 million for Ohio. And that goes to all schools that had Title I-A in the prior fiscal year. They are going to get a Title IV allocation. So in Ohio, that's around 1,100 schools and districts. And it's a complex network of traditional districts plus community schools plus alternative forms of schools, and as well as having an equitable service portion as well. And there's a complex and existing fiscal reporting and data infrastructure for Title IV, but also for the broader federal grants that these requirements from the U.S. Department have to mesh with and have to fit within. So that's sort of where we are with the existing structures. Get the next slide. And so I always, when I talk about the reporting process, I actually start with the consolidated application from the beginning, because we collect so much important data in our application. And especially for Title IV, our budget details page is very thorough and collects a lot of the required provisions within the application. So it starts with the consolidated application in the CCIP. It includes Title 1A, C, D, Title 2A, 3, 3 immigrant, 4A, 5B, and then the IDEA programs as well. And so what happens next is an education program specialist reviews that application, and it goes through 3 levels of review with a peer review and a final review. We have a team of 16 education program specialists, and each has a region that they support. And then Candace, if you could just go down, I think it's in the same slide, but it's, yeah, you have to, and one more if you could. Yep, there you go. So some of the data elements that we collect within the CCIP Title 4A budget details page are the requirement for consultation, the needs assessment if it's required. It's only required if a district receives $30,000 or more, and it's required once every 3 years. So that was a challenge as well, to develop a system that would collect each LEA based on their need for a needs assessment. Description of the activities, and that includes the provisions that Jeremy was talking about before, with 20% in well-rounded education, 20% in safe and healthy schools, and a portion in effective use of technology if you're over $30,000 or more. So as you can see, Title IV, the way it is written at the U.S. in law in ESSA, is much more complex than maybe some of the other entitlement grants. And then we also collect assurances on that page. You can go to the next one, Candace. And so now I'll talk a little bit about the process challenges. For the reporting process, what have been some of the challenges? So LEAs are required to track revenue and expenditures using the Uniform School Accounting System, or USAS. You might know this as the USAS system. And it was developed many years ago. It's obviously been enhanced over the years, but developed to track all federal and state grant expenditures. So it doesn't align perfectly with those 3 areas of Title IV: well-rounded education, safe and healthy schools, or students, and effective use of technology. So it doesn't align perfectly to those 3 areas. Okay, the next slide, Candace. At Treasurers code each expenditure within that USAS system. And they also have to code them on our Title IV, or on all the grants, on the grant page of their on the budget page of their grant. So they have to have a function, which is a kind of a use of funds, what kind of use it is, and an object code. And so using the function and object code, they put those onto their budget, and then when it gets reviewed, it's kind of a way of categorizing those expenditures. And so project cash requests are submitted for reimbursement against the codes that were listed on the Title 4A budget. You can go to the next one. So why has this become a challenge? Well, we received the 2018-2019 Consolidated State Performance Report, which is a report that Ohio has to submit to the U.S. Department with a number of different grants. Kind of, it's a consolidated performance report. It's kind of, as the name suggests, that asks particular questions that have been approved by Congress for us to report to the U.S. Department on our performance. And this is the first year that they added a Title IV section to the CSPR. And in particular, there are 2 questions there that kind of perked the ears of all the states. Like we went to, Jeremy and I went to a conference, and a lot of the states weren't thinking of this, but they wanted data on the amount of funds spent by LEAs within the 3 content areas of the grant. And so they interpreted a portion of ESSA in this way. It's written in a way that could make you think that you just need to collect expenditures, which we already do. We already do through our final expenditure report. We collect expenditures for each grant. And we have a very thorough budget that breaks it down into the 3 areas of the grant. But they want particularly the amount of funds spent by LEAs in the 3 areas of the grant. So it presented a challenge to us and to many other states as well. So you get the next slide, Candace. And so, as we said, we use the USAS system, and expenditure data was not readily available. And so for 2018-2019 CSPR, what we had to do is we talked to the U.S. Department, and we basically developed a kind of a stopgap measure, a modified expenditure tracking method, where we looked at the budgeted amounts. Like I said, we have a very strong budget and budget details page. We looked at the budgeted amounts in the 3 areas and applied those against the reported expenditures by the LEA on the final expenditure report. So we got estimated percentages for the 3 areas. And the U.S. Department said, that's, it's great for this CSPR, but you do need to be working towards getting exact expenditures in the 3 areas of the grant in the coming years to provide on the CSPR. So that's what I'm bringing to you now, is sort of our plans for that, and how we're going to involve districts in that process. So solutions and steps to change this process. So each Title IV-A allowable activity will be matched with applicable Uniform School Accounting System function codes. So we're going to go through the whole list of function codes. We're already working on this with within the team at Federal Programs, and conferring with Grants Management as well, to kind of code all of these expenditures. And then those function codes will be added into the budget page as well, so that treasurers can clearly see, how each expenditure aligns. So if they check the box for social and emotional learning, how should they be coding it when they submit a PCR? And then at the end of the year, when they're running reports, to be able to submit their final expenditure report. You can go to the next slide. And then we'll also issue guidance, obviously, so we'll have the function codes listed on the budget, but we'll provide guidance as well to treasurers on the suggested way that you code each expenditure in Title IV. And so it would look something like this. It's just a very rough mock-up of this, but you would have some options, most likely. We are trying to narrow it down to one particular code for each use, but sometimes there's overlap. If you think of like a school resource officer, they may do work in social emotional learning, they may do work, in violence prevention and human trafficking prevention. So they may work across multiple allowable activities in Title IV. So that's a challenge. How do we align 2 systems that were not designed together? So we're working on that now and trying to get a system that will work. And an important element to this is the 3 areas of the grant cannot overlap. So we can have multiple codes here within a particular allowable activity, but in the USAS coding, they cannot overlap, because the idea is that we would be able to take this data and run a report on it and pull it into the 3 areas of the grant, the 3 allowable areas of the grant. So then we can get totals for the expenditures in those 3 areas of the grant. And then, so how will that work for the treasurer? So you would code an expenditure on your budget. You'd select the allowable activity, and then when you submit a PCR, you would list the code as well, the function code that goes with that. And then the grants manager, just as our current process is, project cash requests are viewed in the Office of Grants Management, and they would look for that. In addition to the object code, they would look for the function code to ensure that it matches your budget, that falls in the correct area. And then something we would like to do, but maybe not absolutely essential, so we'll see if we're able to do this for this year, is actually have an adjustments page on the final expenditure report that automatically totals up the 3 amounts and shows you how much you spent in the 3 areas. So the treasurers would be able to verify the data that they have as well by running their reports. But the idea is we have a lot of systems behind the scenes that collect this data from the applications and from our PCR system, that we would be able to take that and run a Tableau report and pull it into these boxes to give you the 3 areas of the grant. So it's something else we're working on, as a adjustments page to the expenditure system. And so how will schools and districts be involved? They'll be piloted by a group of Ohio's treasurers, and we've already identified a list of treasurers that we would like to be involved, and we would also like any treasurers that are in the committee of practitioners to be involved in this. If you would like to do that, it would be very helpful to have that feedback. And we want to represent a diverse range of typologies and allocation sizes so that we're capturing Ohio's complexity. And then we will make adjustments after the pilot period based on your recommendations here and recommendations of Ohio's treasurers. So what are the next steps? To engage with our stakeholders, including Ohio's treasurers, to develop the expenditure tracking method. So we'll send out an email probably in early October, and then we'll have probably a Skype session, 1 to 2 hour Skype session to go over through screen share the system that we've provisionally developed. Again, it's just a rough system that we would definitely want to modify based on what's actually going to work, because ultimately we want our systems to work for our treasurers and for our schools. So we're coming there with the framework, but able to enhance it in different ways. So that would be from September to December. And then if there are any enhancements required to our expenditure tracking system, so the PCRs, the consolidated application, Title IV budget details page, we would make those enhancements and we would pilot that with those pilot districts from January to March. And then we make any modifications that are needed from April to July with a rollout date of FY22 of July 1st, 2021. So rolling it out for the FY22 year so that we can then report on the CSPR in the appropriate year. So that's all I have for now, but you may be hearing from me, especially treasurers here, about piloting this expenditure enhancement. And I also look forward to any feedback that you have through the Lenuit or through the chat. Feel free to ask any questions. Thank you so much.
Morgan, thanks so much for your presentation. I'm going to ask Diane, just for the schedule purposes, we have starting at 11:15, we're going to have a break, or excuse me, 10:45, I believe. We're going to have a break from 10:45 to 11, and during that break, we were going to have, discussion on the sticky board. So, Diane, if you could, try to make your next slides here, if you could go through those and try to get done by 11 or 10:45, I'd appreciate it.
Okay, Jeremy,
sorry.
I'm just here to get through everything. And good morning, everyone. I just have a couple of updates. There's some items that we're working on in federal programs for this upcoming year for you to look at. So the first item is new guidance for preschool districts that provide preschool. We've seen this lately here as we've gone through and have visited districts that we wanted to really provide definitely some more guidance in this area, because currently when we look at the guidance documents, it only says, well, you can provide preschool with Title I, but there are some restrictions with this. And we feel as if this information needs to be available. So Title I can be used to provide preschool services in two ways. It can be provided in a school-wide building, or it could be a district-provided preschool. If the program is provided by the building and the funding is pulled from the building allocation budget for Title I, then it would operate as a school-wide Title I program. But if the program is a district-sponsored preschool and is funded through the district set-aside page, then it would be a targeted assistance program. And there's a huge difference between the two. So that's where we want to provide more guidance for districts, because we see that a lot of districts are doing the district set-aside to provide their preschool. So we are working with the Office of Early Childhood Education to update the guidance documents that are available on our site as well as on their site concerning this. One of the items that would occur if you're a district-wide set-aside is the multi-criteria selection process. And the Office of Early Childhood has many instruments that would be good resources to use as a district is determining, well, how are we going to select or determine which students would be eligible for the district ran preschool program. Another item that we also need to look at is this preschool program supplemental to another preschool program, or is it a standalone Title I preschool? And how do we have keep the funding if we're using multiple funding sources to provide preschool? For example, if you're using your public preschool funds that you receive and your Title I funds to provide preschool, how do you assure that the funding sources and all the criteria of both programs are met? So these are documents that we're currently working on to create to assist districts as they're developing preschool programs and then they're trying to implement them. So we should be coming out with those sometime this year, and we do have a session scheduled concerning this this guidance in the OAASFEP Fall Conference. The next item would be the changes that you're going to see is vulnerable youth population, and that's a new term that's come out here recently with ESSA. I've provided you the state's definition for vulnerable youth. It was created by the vulnerable youth team that first joined. And one of the things that we're noticing is that districts really, when they're trying to determine what is supplemental for these vulnerable youth populations and what are they required to do, so that they can really determine, well, how can we use then our federal funds to provide additional services to these students. So we're currently working with the Office of Integrated Student Supports, who they often provide guidance or effective practices for the vulnerable youth students on creating a document that would outline, this is what's required according to Ohio Revised Code and Ohio Administrative Code that districts provide to these different youth, vulnerable youth populations. And then we would have a list also of effective programs or practices for supplemental services for these students, so that districts really then, as they're trying to decide how to expend their funds, especially their Title I funds for these students and the Title IV funds, they would be able then to have some clear documentation or guidance on what really would be considered supplemental for these students. Another area that we are currently and that you're going to notice is Title IIA. And this year there have been a lot of flexibilities and changes in licensure. Well, one of them is your third-party providers, which really took effect last year when they changed some of the state laws and ESSA changed. So anybody, if you're hiring third-party providers to provide any services, whether it's through non-public, your non-public equitable services, or services in your district itself, they do have to be properly licensed. And that would go for public districts as well as charter schools. They would have to meet the properly licensed definition for each of those entities. There's several flexibilities that are coming out currently due to the epidemic or the COVID-19 epidemic for teacher licensure. For example, the extension of licensure for teachers whose license needed to be renewed by June 30th, 2020. Temporary license for 1 year for those new graduates out of college who weren't able to finish their praxis assessment so that they can get in and get their praxis test done. And then, of course, the flexibility of license for next year that a teacher can teach outside of their grade span or subject area for 1 year if needed. Those would be considered properly licensed because it's a state law that has said for 1 year, they're properly licensed. So you can use federal funds if it happens to be that that staff member is providing those services underneath that federal fund. For those. The substitute license changes are still the same. Substitute license are not considered properly licensed. They're not a professional license for those positions. However, for long-term subs, if they are in a long-term sub position and they're licensed for that grade level or subject area, then they would be, as long as it's a long-term sub position. We're working with the Office of Teacher Licensure to really create a document that can help districts with these changes. And then also, are they available with federal funds? Teacher Licensure currently is working on the document and reviewing it before we start sharing it also with our consultants as they're on a desk review or an on-site monitoring, so they can determine if they're properly licensed. And then Teacher Licensure can determine whether or not they want to share this out with districts. But if you have any questions, you can certainly call the Teacher Licensure office. And if it's allowable use of federal funds that you're questioning about, you can certainly call our office. If they're properly licensed, they're properly licensed, even if it is for just 1 year. Another thing that we have seen is an increase in PD. Not only that you're providing a lot of professional development to teachers on how to teach remotely and the resources and the effective practices for remote teaching or hybrid teaching. But we have a lot of districts that will often ask us, can we use federal funds to pay for PD that is provided remotely to teachers or in a hybrid position? And that would not matter. Professional development is professional development regardless. So you can continue to use your Title IIA funds, and if it's a school-wide building, Title I funds to provide that professional development. I just would caution that you still want to make sure that you keep the evidence that would be required for any federal funded federally paid PD, and that would be the PD itself, description, the agenda, and list of participants for it, as well as the fiscal documentation. Finally, rural identification. We have been working over the last 2 years in the office, the agency really, at looking at rural identification and our state definition. We've used our typology in the last few years, and when NCES changed 2016, we had a lot of districts who lost eligibility underneath the NCES model. It went to an urban centric, which looked at the distance of the district from an urban center, regardless of where that urban center was located or the geographical boundaries and barriers that may exist, even if the urban center was in another state. So a lot of our districts that are down along the river that had Pennsylvania and West Virginia, Kentucky as the other state, and there was an urban area in those states. However, in Ohio, they were very rural. For us, lost their rural designation. Our typology, however, the issue that we had was we had our rural, which was very remote rural, and then we had small towns, but we didn't have a designation between those that are small town and then those that are really outside of an urban. So we looked at many factors and we have finally decided on a population density of 250 or less. And we're able then to increase our funding that we received from the U.S. Department of Education and serve more districts, and many of those who lost their rural designation before due to rural not being identified rural were able to gain it. There will be a session at OAA SFEP on this. And that is all I think I had. So I think we have time now for our break. Thank you.
Thanks, Diane. Candace and Jim, can you pull up the board, the sticky board? And for those of you, we have a break here, but we will also use this opportunity to talk about some of the items that you're putting on a sticky board. June and Candace, do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Hi there. Good morning, everybody. Hopefully you'll be seeing a Linote board that we put up, and we've got a bit of guidance and information from a couple offices. Contact information is here as well for a few of the offices, and you can place questions here. We've also, if you don't want to leave those questions here, you can use these email addresses to contact people directly. So if anyone has any questions or anything they'd like to add, please feel free to use that.
Candace, would you mind demonstrating really quickly just how to add a sticky note for those?
Absolutely.
Thank you.
So yes, so for some of these, we have these categories: yellow stickies, blue stickies, pink stickies, to kind of associate these things. So if you want to give a little feedback to Office of Learning and Instructional Strategies, you'd pull, I'm sorry, I should keep up with myself. You'd pull a sticky off from the side here, and then you would bring up, it would bring up an editable version, so you can change your font colors, and then you post it, and it will be available for us to see. Please also include your contact information if you would like to have any response back.
Thank you, Candace.
Thanks, Candace. Does anybody have any difficulties getting on and accessing the sticky board here? Can you talk a little bit how they get this app?
Sure. So if you use the link that's in the chat box, you will find this. It's kind of a lengthy one, so you'll probably want to use that link. And that should take you directly there, and you'll have the ability to put the posties up as soon as you make it to the board.
Great. Thank you, Candace and June, and thanks, Diane, for going over the, some of the federal updates. I really appreciate it. And if we could get back by 11 o'clock, and at that time, we're going to turn it over to Cindy Dewey and her team to talk about school improvement. So we'll take a few minutes here, and thank you so much. So before we move into school improvement, I know many of you are probably checking emails on a break, but excuse me. I don't see a lot of sticky notes. Or does anybody have any comments or questions on the first segment of the presentation that we had around federal program updates, CARES Act, Morgan's discussion about Title IV expenditure reporting? I know we're going to have a lot more work that we're going to have to do around expenditure reporting in the future. So questions and comments. And again, feel free to post those in the sticky board. Okay, while we're getting ready for Cindy and her team to come on, Chun and Candace, you want to move on to the put the other start of the presentation up. And just to remind everybody, this sticky board will be available throughout this this meeting for you to post things on, and then we will use this to also add to some of the summaries of the meeting. So, and again, make sure you put your contact information if you have any particular questions you want us to get back to you specifically. All right, with that said, we're back at 11 o'clock and we are going to move into the second part of our presentation. And with this, I'm going to turn it over to Cindy Dewey, and who is the director for the Office of Improvement and Innovation. And I believe she might have others on her team that will be helpful in the presentation. So Cindy.
Good morning, Jeremy and members of the committee. We are here today, very excited to be here today to share with you a grant program expanding opportunities for each child. Andrea is here in case there are questions, and Brian will be sharing an overview of the grant program.
Okay, Cindy, I guess that starts with me. So this is Andrea Faulkner, currently Assistant Director in the Office of Improvement and Innovation, just with some quick updates of things that come out of our office that have an impact on some of the work. First and foremost, school and district identifications will not be changing. They will stay the same as the 2019 and 2020 school year.
I believe Shelby might talk about that a little bit later today, a little bit. Notifications will be going to superintendents and building principals in the next week or so. So your district should be receiving some additional information. Things to think about. The supports by identification staying the same. Supports will continue. Expectations continue. And we are working with the Office of Accountability for more information about what the fall identification will look like and what will the school year of 2021 and 2022 look like. And I think Shelby actually will talk a little bit about that as well. Next slide, please.
Might be having some trouble with the bandwidth here. Oh, there we go.
Okay, so we want to talk a little bit about school improvement funding before we start getting into Brian talking about the expanding opportunities for each child grant. For some of you, you may not realize we still do actually have school improvement grants. Those are the SIG grants. We do have just a few districts and community schools who have those funding still. This is the final year for that. There will be no additional carryover of funds at the end of this school year. Our hope, as I think I've heard, if I was counting at least 6 times today, we do not wish to return any funds to the U.S. Department of Education. So we are going to be working this year to ensure that all those funds are spent out so that we do not need to return any of those funds. For those of you who remember, the School Quality Improvement Grant is what took the place of the SIG grants. We are in year 3 of 4 for those School Quality Improvement grants. At this time, at the end of this school year, for this fiscal year, we do not anticipate having carryover. We did allow for carryover due to the extenuating circumstances with districts' inability to spend due to the school building closure, but we are not anticipating carryover for this school year, so fiscal year 21 into 22. We do have Title I non-competitive school improvement dollars. We did allow for those to have carryover as part of those awarding dollars. Based on the FERs that we receive, we will be reviewing that to determine if there are any additional Title I non-competitive dollars that we're able to send out, and we will send those out about mid-year. So with that, I'm going to hand you over to Brian Hoynacke. He is in our office, and he oversees the expanding opportunities for each child grant dollars.
Thanks, Andrea. So some of you have probably heard a little bit about this grant program already. If there's questions, I will take them. I'll cruise through. So good morning, everyone. Expanding Opportunities for Each Child grant program is a federal Title I Part A dollars for this program. In FY18 and FY19, it was a multi-year competitive grant program. And then moving forward in FY21 and likely beyond, we've actually shifted this funding to a non-competitive program and the funds we intend to award annually. Next slide. A little bit of an overview here. These funds are designed for school improvement activities for low achieving students as well as students from low income families. And they are meant to be spent on advanced coursework, which includes things like AP and IB, as well as advanced STEM courses, career pathways, which can include career counseling, career tech, anything career related, basically. Personalized learning, we haven't had a ton of districts use it in this model, but we expect them to moving forward because this can include digital and online based learning potentially. And then credit recovery and academic acceleration is another one. And most of these funds are meant to be spent at the middle school or high school level. Next slide. Thank you. A little bit more of an overview here. Funds must align with the district and community school improvement plans. Any district that receives Title I funds is eligible for the funding, and they get a percentage. So it's based on formula. So it's roughly equal to about 2 to 3% of the amount of the Title I funds that districts would get each year. And it's not, it is actually additional funding that districts are seeing this year. So we're not requiring you to take Title I funds and spend them in this way. It's extra money that districts have not seen in the past that they would be spending in this way. And the funds have to be prioritized as much as possible for priority and then focus schools and then other low achieving students. I wanted to give a few examples of some of the programs that are happening throughout the state with schools that had the competitive round of funding. In the new Lexington School District in Perry County, they do a lot of really exciting work with community partners on workforce development and building out their industry recognized credentialing programs. In Marion City School District, they actually developed a workforce acceleration collaborative with the partner districts that you see here. And that has been an opportunity to expand their career pathways for hundreds of students amongst those districts. And I wanted to give a little shout out to Diana Ellert, who's on this call. Cleveland Municipal Schools has been doing a lot of great work around AP coursework and professional development for their teachers. And they did some shifting of their funds for this previous year to even spend the funds to help AP students access coursework while working remotely, which I think was a good use of those dollars. And then the Marion City Schools Collaboration has also done work around AP coursework. They specifically were focused on STEM and computer science courses, which was good to see. In terms of who supports this work, a lot of the people that are on this call. So Office for Improvement and Innovation, as well as the Office of Federal Programs are sort of the two primary forces that support the work. And then there's also a committee that's intra-agency at the Department of Ed, which is made up of people from Career Tech, Teaching, Leading, and Learning, and the Office of Exceptional Children. If you want additional resources, we have a webpage. The link will be there in the slides once they're shared. You can also just Google expanding opportunities for each child, Department of Ed, and it will pop up. There you can find a really comprehensive grant funding information document, a worksheet to help you fill out the CCIP application. And just so you know, that application lives in the consolidated application within the CCIP. And that's a new thing for this year. And there's a lot of other resources there for planning. And finally, here's the contact email for that grant, which I manage as well as other people on Andrea's team. So if you have questions, you can email us there, and I'll type it into the chat box as well. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Brian, Andrea, and Cindy. Any questions from the team or the committee? Any questions from the committee? Thank you, Brian. Brian, the grant that you just were mentioning, can you talk a little bit about has that gone out already out the door?
Yes, it has. The non-competitive funding went out, I think, about a month ago now, and we've had quite a few districts go back into their consolidated application and resubmit. I've been seeing a variety of things. So the federal consultants have been approving it and sending me questions. And we've been seeing a lot of AP, advanced coursework type things, as well as career pathways. Most districts are really taking those funds and boosting programs or adding to programs that they already had. But we have seen some get a little bit creative and do some personalized learning as well.
Great. Thanks, Brian. Members of the committee, are your districts receiving these funds? Anything you want to add to what you plan to do with with these expanding opportunity grants? Anybody have any interesting stories? I know that Brian mentioned and highlighted Diana. Diana, anything you want to talk about with your grant?
No, I think we really enjoyed having the grant. We got the competitive grant last year. And so we do. My son's frying something. Let me go downstairs. Hold on one second. Okay, the problems with working from home and trying to have my office in the dining room. Anyways, we've been using it for a lot of like our college and career ready programs, and exactly as Brian was stating too, we use the majority of the funding for our advanced placement coursework and College Credit Plus. So it's really been a wonderful fund to have in our district. It is in our CCIP, and once our CCIP is approved, I think we are ready to submit our budget narrative. We're currently working on it right now.
Great, thanks, Diana. Oh, yes, please.
This is Andrea. One of the things I think, as you're talking about like what people are doing, our office has been very flexible in working with, and Brian has been working one-on-one with some districts to think about how to effectively and most appropriately use these funds in the world of COVID. Diana being one of them, we have conversations and start talking about like if districts are having ideas or they're thinking of a unique way to use this, then it is reaching out to the Expanding Opportunities mailbox, reaching out to Brian to make sure that if you're going down a path, we can help support you get there, and still make sure that you're appropriately using funds. And that goes with the school improvement dollars as well.
And Brian also worked with us because in the spring when we all quickly had to begin working remotely from home in Cleveland, our students are not one-to-one. So he worked through a process that helped us purchase some devices with the funding for kids that were taking advanced placement coursework because they needed, a higher end laptop. So that was really helpful too, Brian. He supported us a lot in the spring and we appreciated it.
Thanks, Andrea and Diana. I want to echo, and put a plug in for Cindy and her team and the work of my team in the Office of Federal Programs to support the Expanding Opportunities Program. Many of you, may know that Ohio's one of the few states that are taking advantage of the Direct Student Services Program, which we're naming Expanding Opportunities. And as Brian alluded to in his slides, we have the competitive side, and we also have the non-competitive side, which I think is very unique and places Ohio in a very, very good position. So we're hoping, and what we've heard is that districts really appreciate that work. So kudos to the Office for Improvement and Innovation and the support of the Office of Federal Programs. So with that, we're right on 11:15, so we're keeping to the agenda. It's my pleasure now to introduce our next speaker, Shelby Robertson, who's the Director of Accountability. Shelby, take it away.
Yeah, awesome. Good morning, everyone. Thanks so much for having me here for some quick updates. We'll try to stay on the timeline. I know you guys have a packed agenda. So with the Office of Accountability and our report card updates, as you can imagine, with the cancellation of spring tests and the state and federal waivers, our 2020 report cards will look a little bit different, but they will exist. So we've recently put out a new frequently asked questions and this quick view document, which Candace graciously put on some slides for me to give you a sample. Both of these are linked on the Linowit. And if you go to the department's website, you could also just type in report card resources and this information will come up. They're right there on that main page. So the main thing I think to remember is that there will be no ratings or grades this year. We won't be calculating the final, kind of component grades or measure grades any of that information, but we are going to report what data we have. And so that's going to look a little bit different in a couple of different places, especially for most of you on the committee, I know within districts. So in this, and that will only be in the secure data center, only available to those with access within your school buildings or your district. On the public reporting side, that's where this quick view document that's on the screen really comes into play. So there will be a lot of information that will not be available at all this year. It won't be on the interactive web page of the report card, and it won't be in those download files, the Excel spreadsheets that are available. But there is some data that is still available. We want to make sure that we get that out for transparency, for information, for planning. So when we think about without the spring tests, right? So a lot of that achievement data is what won't be available. So for the most part, you can expect our graduation rates and our prepared for success measures to still be reported in terms of the data or the graduation rate. And that's because as you all I'm sure are familiar, that information is lagged a year. So that was all prior to the impact of the 2019-20 school year impacted by the school building closure starting in March. There will also be some information about the improving at-risk K-3 readers component, the third grade reading guarantee promotion. Any of that information that is based on those fall diagnostics is still going to be reported where we have complete reporting for it. So you may see more details in the secure data center, but on the actual public reported report card and download files, you'll only see partial information where available. What you will still see as normal is all that data that goes into the district or the school details. So enrollment, demographics, most of the teacher and principal information, not for teachers displayed on the report card itself, but it will be available in the download file. And so for a couple of these cases where you might not see, you might see the X in the column for the report card website, but you might see the green check mark that will put it in a download file. Our reason for doing, but there are some concerns about the interpretation. So in some of these situations, in the educator evaluations specifically, you know, there were requirement changes. And so all of the districts starting in March really reacted to where they were at with educator evaluations differently. And so the data there is a little bit less comparable to prior years or between districts and schools because the requirements really shifted a lot of those decisions to local control to make sure that everyone had that flexibility to focus on health and safety first. And so we are able to, in those download files, put more details and explain a lot of that much better than we are in the limited space we have on the website. So that is an example of kind of how we're approaching the 2020 report. Federal school improvement identification, state identification, a couple of different programs for community schools. There's a Columbus pilot program. All of those items, in most cases, the identification from the prior year is going to roll forward. So that is detailed in our report card FAQ, as well as the COVID informational pages that are available on the department's website. A lot of that happened through that temporary state law that was passed with how we were going to handle accountability and assessments moving forward for this past. For the school improvement identification and in general assessments and accountability, I will say, we have been in communication with the U.S. Department of Ed. We have a group through CCSSO, the Council for Chief State School Officers, where I gather with my counterparts across the country and we make sure to kind of stay up to date on what everyone's doing and where we're at, how we can help each other. And so that's with the U.S. Department as well. And at this point, it's really in that wait and see. It's too early to make decisions about how we're going to approach these things for this upcoming school year. And so in that way, identification is also kind of in the balance, right? Like we want to make these decisions, but we want to make them based on the data we have, our confidence in that data, the comparability or interpretation of the data. And so to some degree, we have to wait and see, and we know there's a tension in communicating that as well. So it's on our radar. We're working to get out the 20 report card, and we are going to immediately shift into how we can approach sure the data is useful and transparent, but being really clear about what interpretation or changes there might be to it. So there's a lot of me talking very quickly, updates on the report card. I welcome any questions. I've put in office or for me directly, feel free to reach out. We will be updating that FAQ. So if a couple of you send in the same question, or if you need clarification on something, not only will we get back to you, but we will also update that FAQ for everyone. So we're doing that on a rolling basis as we come up with things and as questions come into us. So thanks. That's all I have, unless there's questions.
Shelby, thank you so much. I know that you probably don't know this, but you're, at least on my end, it sounded like you're going in and out a little bit from your connection might have been a little off. So if you could, make sure you put your contact information in there, and we will certainly direct any of the questions to you. And just a reminder to everybody, I think we're having a little bit of bandwidth problems. So if you're, if you're not presenting, if you could remember to just take your video off, so we don't have any of these connection difficulties. But thank you. Any questions for Shelby? Okay. Shelby, you were actually put us a little ahead of schedule, so thank you so much. I really appreciate that. And is there is everybody getting the slides and able to download some of the documents that Shelby highlighted on her slides? I think if you have the you probably can't, obviously click on that while it's on the screen, but hopefully everybody has the slides, and the links will be there for you to click on those documents. So again, thank you. Yanetta, are you able to jump on about 5 minutes earlier than usual?
Oh, I absolutely can.
All right. Well, everybody, we might get you out of here a little earlier than we expected. So it's my pleasure to introduce Yanetta Harper, who's the Director of Educator Effectiveness. So Yanetta, thank you for joining us.
Hello, everyone. Hope you're doing well as we navigate this our new normal here. So what I'm going to do is just kind of go over some updates to the teacher evaluation system for the state of Ohio. So all the information that I'm going to go over is posted on the website. I'm merely going to go over our frequently asked questions document that's there. So if you miss something, no worries, we'll make sure that you get that. Next slide. Okay, so let me catch up. During the coronavirus related ordered school building closure, the focus was on really completing educator evaluations, as evaluation data was still being collected for many teachers, administrators, and school counselors. So moving to remote learning and supporting students in the setting impacted decisions around the completion of the 2019-20 educator evaluations. So now as districts begin to plan for reopening, the information on these web pages is intended to help educators plan for the 2021 evaluation and implementation of the Ohio Teacher Evaluation System. When the term educators use, it is intended to include teachers, counselors, and administration administrators. The information in the presentation is informational and should not be considered as supplanting existing collective bargaining agreement language. And it's based upon the Ohio Revised Code, or House Bill 197 and House Bill 164 of the 133rd General Assembly. So that provided some changes for you. So the deadline to have the new OTES policy was July 1st, but now it's been extended to September 1, 2020. So I know some superintendents kind of had some concerns in terms of why, we continue to enforce the OTES policy to get it put into the policies, but you just need a policy. You don't have. You still can delay the implementation for the OPES, the new OTES. I'm sorry, the new OTES. So the Ohio Department of Education is providing flexibility in accordance with recently passed legislation regarding the deadline for revision of the District Board of Education policies to conform to the OTES 2.0. So current law requires the Board of Education of each school district to update the teacher evaluation framework by July 1st. That has been extended to September 1st, only to have the policy in existence. Go to the next slide. So here are some changes that you might want to be aware of in terms of the student growth measures this year. So the local boards may choose three of the following. A school district board of education may not use value-added, high-quality student data or any other student academic growth data to measure student learning attributable to a teacher or principal while conducting evaluations. So you won't be using student growth measure data in terms of the actual evaluation for educators this year. Rather, a district board may use only the other factors and components that do not pertain to student learning attributable to the educator. However, a district board may consider as part of the educator's evaluation how a teacher or principal collects, analyzes, and uses data, including student academic growth, to adapt instructions to meet individual student needs or improve practices. So really the bottom line of that is when you do put your educator evaluations in, you will only be doing the performance piece. This year, you will not be including the student growth measure. And even if you're doing the OTES 2.0 that has the high quality student data, you won't even be using that, only to kind of maybe coach and coach teachers, not evaluate them. Next slide, please. If a district chose to use the COVID-19 exemption in 2019 and 2020, which a district could have chosen to close their evaluations early, they could have chosen to incomplete evaluations. Those educators maintain the rating and evaluation cycle that were in place at the start of the 2019-2020 school year. So this really addresses the less frequent evaluation cycles. So if a district said, we're just gonna not complete this year because of COVID, that's fine. And some districts did complete. But this specifically addresses if a teacher's accomplished rating is carried forward, or if a teacher's skill rating is carried forward, how do they get into that less frequent evaluation? So pretty much the bottom line is whatever a teacher was at the beginning of the school year last year, they should remain that interval of evaluation. So next slide, please. Okay, the evidence collected during the 2019-20 and 20 evaluation process would not, if it was not used for evaluation purposes, if evaluations were exempt due to the COVID-19 option, the evidence collected from the observations and professional conversations should be used for the teacher self-reflection and can also be provided for professional growth plans. So if you made midway through the year and you had like your first cycle evaluations completed and you wanted to use the feedback from that for those evaluations to inform your professional growth plans this year, you can do that. Next slide, please. Completed 2019-20 evaluations without student growth measures. So once again, if you did not complete those with the student growth measures, which you had the option to do, the House Bill 164 allowed an evaluation of a teacher on a less frequent cycle to be completed without a student growth measure. If a district board chose to complete an evaluation for a teacher without student growth measures, the board may continue to evaluate the teacher on the less frequent evaluation cycle. The teacher will remain at the same point in the teacher's evaluation cycle and will retain the same evaluation rating for the 2020-21 school year. For example, an accomplished teacher in the year 2 of a less frequent evaluation cycle during 1920 would again be accomplished in year 2 of a less frequent cycle in the fall of 2020. So we really didn't want to penalize people because of the situation that the flexibility gave for you to choose to not complete evaluations. We didn't want to penalize people, and we really didn't want to put everybody on the full cycle. So wherever the teacher was last year, they should be there again if you chose to not complete your evaluations. Next slide. Once this slide really addresses evaluations without student growth for 2021. So 2020-21 school year, you should not be using those value-added numbers or anything like that. So school district of education, they may not use the value-added or high-quality student data or any other student academic growth data to measure student learning attributable to a teacher or principal while conducting evaluations. A district board may use only the other factors and components that do not pertain to student learning attributable to the educator. So once again, for this next school year, definitely going to use performance and not student growth. However, you know, if you want to look at some of your student growth information to, you know, coach teachers and provide them some feedback, that can be used. It just cannot be used for evaluation purposes. So that's going to be, if you don't take anything out of this presentation, if you could share that with your districts, that in 2020-21, they will not be using student growth measures. Next slide, please. So how does an educator ensure that they do not include student academic growth data to measure the student learning attributable to teacher or principal? You want to make sure student academic growth data is not used to measure student learning. Use only the teacher and principal evaluation, performance evaluations, and that's pretty much what this says. Next slide. So how does the new House bill impact evaluation cycles? I think I've talked about that before. Flexibility is granted by the temporary state law. It may impact some teachers' evaluation cycles. You can go to these pages, and we actually have a chart here to help you to determine, you know, if a teacher's rating was this, they should be on that cycle. Next slide, please. In terms of the law did not change that any evaluator does have to be credentialed. So now we have 2 systems in play right now. We have the original OTES for those folks who are not at the end of their collective bargaining agreement. And then we have OTES 2.0 going on for people who had to adopt and are at the end of their collective bargaining agreement. All credential training is being offered remotely. So, you know, you can go into STARS and register for those trainings. So the evaluator credential training is available through all local ESCs, and both trainings are available in STARS if your administrators or whoever's evaluating your teacher needs it. Next, please. So if you have a current OTES 1.0 credential, do I have to re-credential and, you know, to evaluate on the new system? Yes, you do. So there is a bridge.
Looks like that is frozen. Everybody else seeing that?
Yes, I don't hear her any longer.
Okay.
Yep, we lost her. We dropped her.
Okay. Candace, could you, while she's getting back on, Candace, can you just scroll down the remaining slides? I think that might have been the second to last slide. Yeah, it looks like it was interesting timing. That was her last slide. So any questions that the committee have for Yanetta, and may be helpful if you want to type those in there. And it looks like I just saw Marva's trying to get her back on. So I think Diana said this, the task and the trials and tribulations of working remotely. So thank you for bearing with us here. Any questions that we have? Okay, thanks, Candace, for moving that through here. So it looks like her slides just talk about, contact information, regional support areas. Let's move down the next slide here. Okay, Sherry, are you on?
I am on.
Okay, no.
I'm scared though, all these glitches. So
back to back, Shelby and then Yanetta. Okay, well, it's my pleasure to introduce Sherry Burcham, who's the director of the Office of Learning and Instructional Strategies. So, Sherry, if you freeze, we'll make sure that we get through those slides for you. So no pressure at all.
If I freeze, go straight to the Linoet board, and I've posed 2 questions there. So I was hoping to make this a little bit more interactive. So for some reason I freeze, go to the 2 questions on the Linoet board and just start dropping in your responses there.
That's great. Thank you.
Absolutely. My office, we oversee the K-12 Ohio Learning Standards and the model curriculum. And I wanted to give you a few updates, and then I wanted to do a little interactive piece, as I just mentioned, to get some of your feedback, because we're starting to look at some supports for districts, and I want to see specifically what you think you need and how we can help design our work around that. So first, a couple of things. Obviously, with remote education, blended environment, and then full-time in person, it's a little bit of a trying time right now for many districts. And our office has worked on the remote learning guide, which is on our Reset Restart website. We also have out there a student readiness toolkit, and I want to make sure I call your attention to those. That again is on the Reset Restart. The student readiness toolkit is there to help teachers assess the strengths of the students and the areas of opportunity for growth that is based on the previous year's content. You also could pull down this year's content, but what we've done is we've broken it up by the standards and provided some assessment type questions so that you can look at the areas where students really did well in the spring or in their previous year, or maybe they just need a little bit of additional guidance and support, so you know to integrate that in for this year. You can also use it as a pre-assessment for this year's content too. So let's say you have a 3rd grader, or your teachers have a 3rd grader, they could pull down specific 3rd grade standards and use that as a pre-assessment to see, you know what, we can consolidate this. Most of our students already know this. Not that you're going to skip the content, but you can embed it in and maybe not have such a heavy focus. Or if you want to see how they, how successful they were in the remote learning in the spring, you could pull the 2nd grade standards down and do some assessments there. So that is out there. I also want to call your attention to, and I'm going to copy the link here and put it in the chat box. Our office has been doing a lot around virtual meetups. And the virtual meetups are a way to provide professional learning for teachers, administrators, district leaders, really whomever. And it's specific to content as well as general remote education instruction strategies. They are typically about a 45-minute webinar, 1 hour webinar. Sometimes they are interactive, sometimes there's question and answers, and sometimes it's more of just a presentation. People can earn contact hours for those. I would strongly suggest watching that website that I put up there. We just did a 3-day series and have just been hearing tremendous responses from the education community. It's something that you can use for professional learning for your staff. So you could go on there and find something about science education and remote education, and then show that to your science teachers. It could be your staff meeting or just something that you send out to your teachers to support them during this time. So please, please, please check out that site that I put in the chat box. In addition to K-12 learning standards and model curriculum, the other area where our office is starting to focus is around high quality instructional materials and how we can support districts in the selection, the review, and the implementation of what we would consider high quality instructional materials. The way that that's defined is that the instructional materials that are used in the classroom are aligned to Ohio's learning standards and that they are at the rigor that's expected for that grade level. I know in the past, sometimes we would bring things down to a below grade level to meet the needs of a student. And actually the mindset is starting to shift there. That's not proven to be helpful. It actually causes a larger gap in the education of a student. And what we're hoping for is that we actually are presenting students with grade level instruction, but scaffolding and providing those supports around that grade level instruction. What that means is oftentimes districts, you know, when I was in curriculum, a certain vendor would come along with the bells and whistles and say, hey, buy our textbook, buy our online program. And it looked good. We did a little committee and we bought it. Was it aligned to Ohio standards? Not always. Sometimes they put a sticker on saying it is aligned to Ohio standards, and it's really not because it's more of a national instructional material or curriculum set. What I would love your feedback on, I'm going to pose 2 questions to you. We're going to use the Linoet board, which I believe Chun just put into the chat box. So about 4 messages up. If you can click on the board, I'm going to move it over to my other window so I can read it. I would love on a pink sticky, so that's my color on the board is pink. I want to ask first, we're going to focus specifically on remote education. What help around instruction, such as instructional materials, instructional design, pedagogy, professional learning, does your district or do you need specific to remote education? So when you go into the board, if you can just write Q1 and then your answer. And while you're doing that, I'm going to kind of shout out some of the answers so you can focus and you can just listen while you're writing. The other question I would love, this is more long-term. The other question I would love to get your feedback on is beyond remote education. So in the normal world that we lived in, which when that returns, I don't know, but beyond remote education, does your district have a current process to select instructional materials and curriculum? What does that look like? Who's involved in that process? Is that centralized at the district level? Is that a building level decision? Do you even have a process? I know there are many, many districts and many buildings that leave it to the teachers to determine what instructional materials. I would love your feedback on that. So we'll take a few minutes. Yes, if you can't get onto the board, just start typing into chat. Q1, here's my answer. Q2, here's my answer. So let's take a few minutes and start dropping those into the Linoet board or the chat box.
Candace or Sherry, could you also, just for those that might not be able to get into the sticky board, could you type the questions or put those, cut and paste the questions into the chat box?
I'm going to do that right now. Thank you. Yeah, I think there might be a little bit of an issue getting into the board to edit. Okay, I've dropped in question 1 and question 2. So question 1, what help around instruction does your district or do you need specific to remote education? So immediately, how can we help you specific to curriculum and instruction for Ohio's learning standards? And then the second is more that long-term planning beyond remote education. Does your district have a process to select instructional materials? Is that something that you would like the state to create a framework on, to give districts almost a toolkit, professional learning around how do you select instructional materials that will meet the students' needs at the grade level that's expected? Okay, we've got some coming. Whoa, all of a sudden my board just went crazy. Okay, great. We'd like some best practices or strategies for primary grades for remote learning. Lincoln Learning Resources. How do you implement Lincoln Learning Resources for online students? Okay, someone said checking to see if this works. It works. Teachers need to support to understand the difference in instructional approach from in-person versus online. Yes, I would agree. That is a hard one. I have 3 boys on my own, and today was the first day of remote instruction. it was fun. So scheduling. How do you do instructional blocks? Whole group to small group. Okay. We've got, let's see here, assessment. How do you assess? That's an excellent question. And how are we ensuring that they're not getting a little extra help? Curriculum is reviewed by the curriculum team that involves the director of curriculum and teachers. This final decision is made by the director of curriculum and approved by the board. All teachers have voice, and guidance is always, that's excellent to have the teacher voice. Excellent. Okay, let's see what's coming in through the chat box. Let's see here. Best practices okay, the same thing. Okay. Okay, so we have a curriculum council with representatives that sit across. We have a handbook that lays out the process for, that's excellent. I'm finding that some districts have a handbook or a process and some don't. And so where I think we could target our work at the state level is to providing a sample process. And so that would involve, getting some stakeholders together. So I might reach out to some of you as we go through this process. And I mean, it's going to be 6 to 12 months as we go through, but getting stakeholder groups together to look at what this framework looks like. What's this process look like? Who should you involve, and how do you actually assess to see if the instructional materials meet the needs of your students, not just everybody's? Let's see here. We've got district created several teams that focused on a variety of topics, including remote learning and selection. How do we support the parents to understand the process? Completely agree. I will tell you this morning, 3 boys online and 2, my high school kids were actually having to upload voice clips onto Google Slides. I know how to do most things. I'm pretty techie, but voice clips, I have no clue how to do. And yet I didn't find any instructions, so we didn't do a voice clip. And so I worry about the parents that don't know how to support their students on even the most simplest of things. What I would consider simple, like logging in Google Drive, that's not simple for everybody. I do worry about that. Beyond the instructional piece, how can the state assist us with assessing devices? Difficult to find, and the state orders seem to take priority. There's definitely a backlog of the internet. I hope everybody is aware of the a $50 million grant for technology that's out there. Jeremy, I don't know if we can put a link to that in there that DeWine released a couple weeks ago. That would be something that could help. That I believe
that's a great suggestion. Candace and Chun, if you can remind me, we'll make sure that we get the information out to everybody about the broadband assistance.
Thank you, broadband. Yeah.
And Sherry, I was just about ready to type this in. Very impressive that your computer and internet has not frozen, given what you just said. Yeah.
Don't jinx it. We just upgraded on Friday, so don't jinx it. Knowing that I was going to have 3 kids at home and having these things, we upgraded. So knock on wood, Jeremy. Don't say that out loud. Let's see here. Okay, we form a committee. So we've got, these are great responses. And so I'm seeing a lot of committee that analyzes the needs and looking at best practices. So this is excellent. I know we're kind of close on time. And what I would like to do is if, keep adding to the board or the chat box. And what I would like to do is just kind of compile your responses. And if you have an interest in being part of the stakeholder group that helps to look at this framework or toolkit that we're going to start to work on, drop your name in the chat box and just say Sherry-I'm interested or whatever, and I'll get your information. But it's always good to have the voice of people that are out in the field and that are actually doing the work. So, okay, great. Yes, I'd love to see people. Okay, so Jackie, thank you. Gotcha. Please, 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 if you're interested. Okay, thank you, Rachel. Would love. Great. Diana, thank you. This is great. Because I think what you start to see is across Ohio, we have different ways of selecting instructional materials, but there's ways that we can support districts and that don't have it, or maybe it's building based. We're seeing that as some too. Alexandra, thank you. I've got you. Jonah, wow. Jeremy, I might be getting the whole group here. Love it. Okay, if you have additional questions or things you want to share, go ahead and put those on the Linoette board and or the chat box, and I'll save that and then go through it and then loop you in. Again, it might be a few months that you hear from me, so it may be one of those things where you're like, oh yeah, I remember that back in August. But I love the interest. So thank you, and thank you, Chun, for getting that in there. Okay, any questions?
Great. Sherry, thank you so much for all the information, and the committee, thank you for all the great responses. And and Chun, thank you for putting that. For those of you that didn't see this, Chun put the link to the broadband grant, so it's right there if you're interested and need more information on it. So thank you so much, Sherry.
Thank you.
Okay. Well, we're getting close to time here. We might actually get you out a few minutes early. So Candace and Chun, if you could move on to our last item, which is EdSteps updates. Okay. Chun, either way, I want to first introduce you. Chun Kambara is the program administrator for the EdSteps program. So Chun can certainly interject on any of the slides that we have here. But Candace, go ahead and move on to the next slide. I think we can move on. Okay. So, we're not, most of you have probably know a lot about EdSteps. So I don't think we're going to get into, too much detail on this, but this slide really, talks about, what we're trying to do with EdSteps and really what is EdSteps. EdSteps is the department system of tiered e-plans and supports. So you can see our logo right there. Many of you are either on our advisory team or part of the program pilot project. Go ahead and move on to the next slide. So this slide, you know, and Chun, you know, let me know if you know, you want to add any comments to these slides. But basically, I think what we're trying to say on this slide is EdSteps really aligns exceptionally well to our strategic plan, Each Child, Our Future. And you hopefully, as you're working on EdSteps and providing input on EdSteps, you'll see the connection to the vision, the goals, the learning domains, and the principles. We can move on to the next one. Okay, I think this is one of those slides that, you know, scrolls down as you keep hitting the slide. But, you know, what are our objectives of EdSteps? And, you know, you probably can keep clicking on this, but yeah, it's, you know, we want to make sure that we create a process of collaboration for the districts and all of our stakeholders in the department to really drive continuous improvement. And you can see below there the consolidate the processes and timelines. So EdSteps is, and there's probably a slide on this, but you know, really EdSteps is is about building a system that is built by and used by our customers. This is all about collaboration. It's not just about updating and replacing the CCIP, but it's a collaboration process that is about human capital. Support the process with streamlined and simplified tools, and again, cultivate collaboration. You can move on to the next. So, you know, this slide talks about the solution. So, you know, what is the problem? And you know, I think we probably want to, you know, if we didn't have a slide there, what I would say is, you know, not just what is EdSteps, but what are we trying to accomplish? So we know that our CCIP system was built at the time of No Child Left Behind, which was a very prescriptive law, and it was early 2000s, and it is in, you know, it was and still is a great system, but like everything else, we need to improve. And so these proposed solutions are that we have one and only one needs assessment. We have a lot of different needs assessments out there. We should create one needs assessment, and Andrea Faulkner and the One Needs team has done a great job to build a streamlined system. We also want to have a one plan. There's a lot of different plans out there. We are looking to create one plan, and that plan would be good for 3 years. Consolidated funding applications for both formula and competitive. You know, this is an area on our slides. I think we'll ask for feedback, but the feedback is that we really want to know how we can improve the existing budget application and details. Right now, we're going through a pilot program with 40 districts. We'll be moving into cohorts. The next cohort will be cohort 1, cohort 2, and then cohort 3, which are all moving into 3-year planning cycles. Cohort 1 planning cycle begins next year. We're currently working with the pilot group of 40 districts. And the last solution is to have a dashboard and communication hub that is impactful and meaningful. Next slide. This really is just more of a technical, you know, visual of what this EdSteps is. You know, it shows the dashboard and reports, and it shows the connections all the way down to the EAS framework, risk management, and system administration. I think you can move on. Working together. again, I said this earlier, but EdSteps project will be created for, designed with, and developed with our customers. This is both internal and external. You can move on. So what we, as many of you know and have heard me talk about, the EdSteps, we have been really working with all of you and the leadership of you and all the stakeholders on EdSteps for nearly 5 or 6 years. You know, it started with internal and external groups. We have steering committees, we have subcommittees for each one of those components that we talked about from a solution standpoint. You know, external, we're working with education stakeholders. We have pilot districts. We will be working on an RFP, and Shun can certainly chime in on this, but, you know, we're getting very close to having an RFP ready to be posted. We're working with the agency and the state that handles procurement, the Department of Administrative Services. You know, our timeline for this is hopefully to have that out in September, if not early October, for the RFP to be posted. And then below on this slide, you can see the various components that we're talking about. Next slide, please. So you know, where are we now? You know, the One Needs Assessment prototype. As I noted about Andrea's subcommittee working across the agency, I think it's very important to note when we talk about this being built by our customers, both internally and externally, and used by our customers. You know, in my 20-some years within the department, I've never seen such a collaboration within the department. Every single office and center is a part of this, and all these subcommittees. And the task of that is to reach out to all of our stakeholders and get that specific input in this process. So on the One Needs Assessment that I mentioned, Andrea's leading, you know, they've replaced the decision framework. You know, it opened this past January. It's available to all LEAs, and you know, this is all, you know, part of the One Steps, and it's on the on our website. You can move on to the next one. So 3-year transition, the pilot, as I mentioned, you know, we had 41 dropped out, but we had, I believe, and June correct me, but I think roughly 150 districts applied to be part of this transition. It is a very robust, group of pilot districts and all typologies, 39 of them. They've identified priority needs within the One Needs Assessment over a 3-year period, developed a comprehensive 3-year plan, and you know, like once we get to the 3-year cohorts, everyone will submit an annual funding application that's aligned to their 3-year plan. And most of you have heard my phrase I use often, which is, you know, fund the plan, don't plan the fund. And so in the actual agency, through the leadership of Diane Neal and others on her team, we have created an agency-wide plan review process. Next slide, please. Yeah, as I noted, you know, we're working on the RFPs, and we've designed 3 cohorts for 3-year planning. All the districts should know the cohort. We have all that information, of course, if you have questions about it. But the cohorts, the 3-year cohorts are, you know, similarly designed like the variety of pilot districts. So we have a good variety of districts within each cohort. Next slide. Well, there you go. This is a graph that shows, you know, when it starts and the 3-year planning. You can see the pilot started for this year and will end on 2023. And, you know, I don't need to read this slide to you, but you can see how cohort 1 will begin its 3-year process of needs identification, likely it will be with the One Needs Assessment prototype beginning this fall, and beginning their 3-year planning later on next calendar year, likely around January. And for the plans that will be in effect for the 2021-2022 all the way through 2023-24, and you can see how that goes. The pilot group will join on to cohort 3. Next slide, please. Again, preparing for the cohorts, we will be providing information, general information, getting people ready for what's to come, for especially targeted to cohort 1, but it will be shared for everybody. We don't want to confuse those that are in cohort 2 and 3 with what needs to be done for cohort 1, but all this information will be out there. But we'll be evaluating. We're doing surveys, of course, with all the pilots. You as the committee of practitioners, certainly we want your input on all the information that we're sharing. In particular, if I don't have a slide here, I would really love if we put it on the sticky board or in the chat feature, thoughts that anybody have regarding how to streamline and make our funding application, which will be an annual funding application, more streamlined and more useful for all the districts. So, I guess I would ask, as you're hearing me conclude this presentation on EdSteps, what are some thoughts that you have? And please put those up on the board. And as I said, we're starting to reconvene. We have existing subcommittees that have been meeting for a while, but we're now starting to reconvene the funding application and the dashboard summary committees. And so what we ask is, is your support and we desperately need and want your input into this process. This is your EdSteps. It's not our EdSteps, it's everybody's EdSteps. And we want you to take ownership and provide input into that process. And again, shifting the narrative of effectively using resources. You heard from Jim and some on his team about how we want to make sure we're more effective in the use of our funds. And as we're asking you to be more effective and efficient on your funds and fund the plan rather than planning to fund, we want to do the same thing. And so at the state level. So we need your feedback, and we ask, obviously for your patience in the short term on any inconveniences that you may have with our existing systems, because all this that we're doing now will make the transition when we have a new system that much better. Next slide, please. I think this is just more communications about EdSteps. Go ahead. Okay. So I'm going to stop there before we, get into the closing statements and adjournment. What questions and comments and thoughts do you have on EdSteps? And June, anything you would like to add that I might have missed?
And Candace, if you wouldn't mind going to that last slide, we just wanted to share that the EdSteps website, yes, that one, the communication one, the EdSteps website is up, and we do try to update that to share any updated information about the overall project and upcoming releases. We also have our email inbox posted there, so it's simply edsteps@education.ohio.gov. So if you ever have any questions or feedback or input that you want to provide regarding the project or any elements of it, for example, if you're having issues with your One Needs assessment, there is a separate inbox for the One Needs assessment, but we'll certainly be able to get your questions to the right individuals. So I just wanted to share that really briefly, just always feel free to reach out and send any questions you have to that EdSteps email inbox. We monitor it very regularly, and we'll certainly get back to you as soon as we can. But as Jeremy said, are there any more immediate questions right now regarding the EdSteps project, anything related to the pilot or anything related to what's upcoming this year for cohort 1 and all other LEAs? One thing that I don't know if we mentioned, but this year, the One Needs Assessment will be used by all LEAs. So cohort 1 will be using it for 3-year planning, but all LEAs will be using the One Needs Assessment to meet any needs they have for a needs assessment. So as we mentioned, the decision framework is no longer going to be available. So all LEAs will be able to use the One Needs Assessment instead.
Thank you, Chun. So any other any thoughts, immediate thoughts? Obviously, this is a large project, and as Chun mentioned, you feel free to reach out to me or Chun directly, or Diane and Andrea on the particular components, or email EdSteps, the mailbox. But anything particular that you comments that you would have on EdSteps, either in the chat or unmute yourself. And I know a lot of you that are on this committee are also part of the pilot and part of the advisory team. So, really thank you for all your input. Okay, well, we are, on time exactly right now for the conclusion of our meeting. I just want to thank everybody, for attending today and being part of this important committee where you're able to hear directly about the work that ODE is doing and our planning for policies and procedures and around our programming, and also, giving us, critically important input into our process. So I thank you for your service and your attention today. I know that this is not the ideal way to get together for these meetings. So thank you very much for bearing with us. We had a few little technical glitches, but I want to thank all the presenters across the agency, and it's particularly my team, Chun and Candace, for all the support you provided. And I guess I'll just turn it over to Chair Blosser. Jackie, any closing remarks that you have about the committee and thoughts for our next committee?
So I just wanted to thank everybody for joining us today. Certainly not ideal to do remote meetings, but we certainly appreciated everybody's participation as we kind of embark on what we've been calling not our new normal, but our updated, I guess, COVID normal process for things. So that moving forward, I look forward to continue the work with the committee. And Jeremy, I appreciate everyone on your staff and all of you at ODE that shared your information with us today. I think speaking for myself and the rest of the committee members, it was very valuable to hear the updates from each of your departments today and things that we can take forward into our districts and in our regions and share that information. So much appreciated today, Jeremy. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. Well, this concludes the committee, and as always, reach out to myself or anybody on my team, and obviously everybody in the department. We are here to help you, and again, thank you for all the input and commitment to this committee. So thank you so much, everybody. Bye-bye now.
Bye. Thank you, everyone.